Last week we shared a few thoughts on the sattvic evolution, which is a crucial point where the human begins to depart into the spiritual. It is the high point where the ego becomes thin enough to drop off, as the mother says, like a useless robe, a garment of which one has no more any necessity. This sattvic evolution, which is spoken of in Indian thought, is not the same as a moral or a social law, not even a religious law. All these arbitrarily divide activities into things which are good and things which are bad. Certain activities are good and certain activities are bad, and they have to be imposed from outside, and an individual has to follow it either mechanically or out of fear, out of pressure of society, or of a religious sanction. But the sattvic evolution is essentially relating to an attitude with which an activity is done. In one of his early essays, Aurobindo speaks about how one can govern a kingdom, one can engage in a fierce battle, be a simple householder, and we may add, in modern context, play football and cricket in a sattvic attitude. Whereas equally, one can do all the religious activities. Every day one may visit a temple, one may do whatever is set, like reading of scriptures, even sit and meditate. But it may be done in a rajasic or sometimes even a tamasic state. Aurobindo speaks about how many people simply observe religious life in a tamasic state, mechanically as a law of the herd, of the masses. But a sattvic state is essentially an inner state. It's a state of desirelessness or at least unselfishness, a state in which one looks to the light and the right. And one does a thing because inwardly one feels or knows it to be the right thing, a thing which will help us in our growth, in our progress, and it will be beneficial for the collective march of mankind, Lok Sangrahartha. This is the essence behind sattvic governance. It's an inner attitude. And one can, as Aurobindo says, engage even in a battle with a sattvic attitude, when no personal profits, no personal benefits are involved, but one does it purely from an unselfish motive. Whereas one can go to God with a very rajasic and a tamasic attitude. One can go to God for the fulfillment of various desires, worldly and even otherworldly. And this attitude is a rajasic attitude. So essentially this sattvic governance is a governance from within outwards. And I think that is one of the fundamental differences in the spiritual thought and the way the mind perceives of these things, especially the modern mind. I don't know its design or someone has kept it. There was a newspaper cutting lying here when I entered, and it is speaking of evolution in human beings through change of genes, etc., etc. Even people speak about technology assisting the evolutionary process. Now, this is how the modern mind conceives evolution. It is something external, some external method. But in the spiritual view, it proceeds from within outwards. The within must change, the outward will follow. It's not an external manipulation. External manipulation may assist at a certain point, but only when there is an inner change does nature allow this outer change. In animals, we don't observe it. Actually, that is the problem. In animals, each species is fixed to its type. So there is very little scope of manipulation. One does not hear of a tiger turning into a vegetarian tiger. Even if for many years he is fed on vegetarian meal, at the first impulse he will turn into a non-veg because his nature is fixed. One doesn't again observe in nature an elephant turning into a non-vegetarian elephant. A snake does not become a sadhu overnight and stop hissing or biting people, despite the famous fable of Sri Ramakrishna. It's human nature But human nature has a great range while in the same form. Within the form, a whole evolution goes on, as is exemplified in the parable of the avatars, that up to human beings, the form and the consciousness change together. But with the coming of humanity, the consciousness begins to change in the same form. So we have in the parable the change of forms and the consciousness together. The fish avatar of the water, then the next avatar, the turtle of the land and water, then the Varaha, which is the avatar of the land. Basically, it's God being born, different powers of consciousness manifesting in nature, and then nursing half animal, half lion. But after that, with the coming of Vamana, the dwarf man, who aspires to conquer the heavens and the earth, and also the subconscious nature, with the coming of Vamana, Vamana is the birth of the psychic in matter, in humanity. There is an individualization of progress. And that's why when Vamana comes, Bali, who represents a very high sattvic, sattvic egoism, it must subordinate itself and surrender to this psychic impulse. So it's a very beautiful story. After Vamana, we see the entire evolution takes place without a change of form. There comes Parshuram, the wild man, the man endowed with tremendous Rajasic energy. What is the law for him? He must live fighting a battle for the truth, for ideal, for what he perceives as justice. Of course, it's his perception, but he acts according to that. And when he acts by that law, he graduates into the next phase, the avatar of the mentalized, idealized human being, Rama. Not the Rama of the axe, but Rama, the sattvic ideal, the embodiment of sattvic ideal. Even beyond that, the journey, the Krishna, Buddha, Christ, the journey goes on while the form remains unchanged. So for a long time, there is a change of consciousness while the form remains the same. And it's only when this consciousness will arrive at a crucial departure point, as the mother has spoken of it, that eventually it will precipitate itself in a change of form also. Whether it will take place through a transmutation of genes, or whether it will take place through an entire change of the physical substance, is yet to be seen. The mother has given hints and many things she has spoken about it, but that's for 1,000 years hence, at least 1,000 years. So what we have to do for the next 1,000 years is basically to work upon our inner beings, on the inner change of consciousness. And for that there is the path of integral yoga. The outer will change when the time is ready and the outer being is ready. This inner change and again this evolutionary process is very beautifully typified in the Upanishads as well as in the Gita. In a beautiful image conjured up, but it's really so very true. This image is described, the image of human being is described as a rath, as a chariot, with the 5 horses and the rein, and the person who holds the chariot, the reins in his hand, and there is the one who is journeying. And the image is described in these terms, that the steeds are the senses. And of course, the steeds are the senses and the vital energy, because they carry the rath forward. This is very interesting, because without vital energy, one cannot take the journey of life, not only of outer life, but also of inner life. All tapasya requires the vital energy. If there is no vital energy, tapasya is not for the inner evolution, is not for people who lack in vital energy. Vitality is important in everything, including spiritual life. It is the same energy, the vital energy, which normally feeds the objects of the senses, that when turned upwards becomes the energy for progress. The mother has spoken about it very beautifully. Then next to these 5 steeds is the rein, and the mind is the rein, because all these things which come through the senses and through the vital energy, as they enter into the mind gives it a certain value, it recognizes them. That's why the mind is regarded as the 6th sense, it is the master sense. If the mind is asleep, then even when the senses are open, when we sleep, typical example is that when we sleep, the ears are open, the nose is open, but nothing registered to us. Some of us also sleep with eyes open. And I have a friend who sleeps with his legs and hands in the crookedest of postures, but he doesn't feel any discomfort because the mind is the one which is actually asleep. So if the mind is asleep, the senses are not informed. So mind is the rain which actually gathers everything, all the data of the senses, integrates it, and it gives it a sense and a meaning. So it's the sixth sense or the master sense. And finally, the reins are in the hand of the buddhi. Last time we spoke about the role of the buddhi. The sattvic evolution is through the buddhi. And it is the buddhi which must control the reins, must direct the steeds, go this way or that way. And this is through a set of choices. The mother speaks about it. Nowadays, of course, much is being spoken of the choiceless awareness. Choiceless awareness is wonderful when one has to withdraw from life. It doesn't matter. When one has to be indifferent to life, when the goal is individual nirvana, it's perfectly fine to abandon all choices and say that it doesn't matter what one does, whether one kicks or rolls a platter, as Aurobindo has noted in one of the poems very beautifully. There is a poem where he says, he said, I am egoless, free, then swore because his dinner was not ready. I asked him, are you so very sure? He said, it's not me, but my belly god that is hungry. So it is really true. Aurobindo says, if really the goal is only to realize the self, it doesn't really matter. Because eventually, what you do or don't do, to an extent it does, but beyond a point it doesn't. But Aurobindo says that in this yoga there is a work to do, a truth to be established against which immense forces of ignorance are arraigned. And so one has to make a choice. And the Upanishad speaks of this choice in two terms, Shreyascha, Preyascha. One way, when we pull the reins, the horses run in the direction of the preyas, whatever is pleasant. The other way, when we pull the reins, it runs in the direction of Shreyas, what is good, what will help in the progress. So this is the whole image of the Upanishad, and finally seated within it is the chariot, the real Rathi, the one who owns the chariot. And the path, what is the path? It says the path is the objects through which the chariot moves. What a beautiful analogy. We speak of path as something inside. We speak of path as sitting in meditation. And when mother, while she was speaking of what are the signs that one is ready for spiritual life, last time we read half of it, she says it's necessary to develop this equanimity. It's necessary also to have this sattvic governance of life, because if that is not there, when people come in contact with this force, they have a breakdown. The mind goes into a state of disorder, the vital goes into a state of disorder because they are unable to bear it. So even from the point of view of the yoga of transformation, it's beautiful if one can allow a certain amount of sattvic governance of life. When asked to define who is the Superman? Mother, will there be many intermediate stages between man and Superman? She says, yes, there will be many. So how does one define what is the label of Superman? How many hours does he sit and meditate? The mother says in the same writing, she says, many people mistakenly believe that the sign of spiritual progress or readiness for progress is the number of hours one can sit and meditate. She says it's not true at all. To just be truly able to meditate, it requires a great preparation. And that's all these choices, the sattvic governance of life, are all readiness. That when we sit, we truly meditate and not just sit and sleep. Like that famous story where a lady who used to go, a man who used to go, because we should not, take all the jokes this way. But a man who used to go and used to sit and close his eyes. And people thought that he is meditating very deeply. Till one day, the secret was out. When everybody got up, he continued to sit with eyes closed. And after some time, one of his friends woke him up. He was afraid that should I disturb him or not. And this man gets up and says, why didn't you wake me up earlier? It's so boring that I just go off to sleep. But at least you should be sensible to wake me up. So she says, it's not a sign that one is able to sit for hours with eyes closed. True meditation needs a lot of preparation. So who then is the Superman? She says, all who are striving, she doesn't even say mastered, all who are striving to conquer their outer nature. All who strive to express in their outer life the experience which has brought them in contact with the truth. All who, instead of turning to the beyond or the highest, who try to express this change of consciousness which they are experiencing within, all who are not satisfied with the ordinary life, but who want to lead a deeper life, all of them are apprentice supermen. And then she says, every time we strive to conquer our lower nature, we are actually taking a step towards superhumanity. So it is these small steps through which one carves the path of superhumanity. It's not something miraculous and dazzling and powerful that one day one sat and had a very beautiful experience and one felt that, well, I have become a superhuman being. When this was asked to Sri Aurobindo said, all that is fine. Experiences enrich the consciousness. They don't necessarily change it. And the mother says, it's through these little victories, win your little victories, that the path towards superhumanity is carved. It is not through extraordinary experiences that one has. It's very nice. It's good to have these if they come as a gift of grace. But even if they don't come, people used to complain to mother. Mother, so-and-so is having this experience, I don't have it. She would say, what does it matter, my child? It's not this. There is a lot of hullabaloo in traditional yogas about this experience and that experience. It's the degree to which we can manifest in our outer life a greater governance, an inner governance, a deeper governance, and at its peak the sattvic governance. That is the real thing. So we see in this whole Upanishadic image a path of evolution. In fact, the image further goes on to say, how does one arrive at that? So it says, when the senses are under the governance of the mind. So it is not the senses which drive the mind. Normally in our life, senses drive the mind. Wherever senses say come, that's very nice, so the mind follows it. It's the mind which decides what is the object that it will hold within, and not the senses which decide the object. It would mean, literally, if one has to take it as an example, one walks through entire Nehru Street, but within the mind one holds the object that one wants to hold. Of course, our life is the reverse. One sits in ashram and meditates on the Nehru Street. That's a different story altogether. All of us are in that state. But the real sadhana is that the mind, the objects are under the control of the mind. The mind itself is under the control of the buddhi. So one meditates on that object not with any inferior motive, but with the highest possible motive. The buddhi decides what should be the object of meditation, what should be the subject of meditation. And when higher than the buddhi, now here again it's something very beautiful, because otherwise one would think, okay, my buddhi is now controlling everything, I have already arrived. So the Upanishad says, when even the buddhi is silent and reposes in the great self, for higher than the buddhi is the great self, and higher than the great self is the unmanifest. So the buddhi itself must be upturned, not sitting over the great self. That great self is below and my buddhi can even capture the great self. The buddhi must know that whatever it may do. In fact, when mother was asked, what is the role of reason? She says, the role of reason is to govern the lower instinct, impulses, vital desire. But people do just the opposite. They leave it free, but let the reason sit in judgment over things which are beyond it. For instance, whether God exists or not. One cannot, because reason cannot tell us that. That is something beyond the reason. But reason has a role in organizing the lower life. So when buddhi, while on one side it's governing the lower nature, on the other side it is silent and reposed, and if we use mother's words, upturned and inturned, as the Gita says, instead of bahu shakhanam, it's vyavsaitmak, it's interned and upturned towards a greater self which is beyond it. And this great self also is not a limited figure or a formula. So the Upanishad says, beyond the great self is the unmanifest. Now, unmanifest is something of which nothing can be spoken. There are always great mysteries which are hiding in the Supreme. And beyond the great unmanifest, there is still one. Because otherwise one would say, yes, this unmanifest is the impersonal universal. So it says, beyond the unmanifest is He, the Purusha, the Supreme. There is none else other who is greater than He. What a great, grand journey from the senses to the mind, to the buddhi, to the self which is greater than the buddhi, to the unmanifest, the spirit which informs and breathes and holds this entire creation, the transcendent, to the Purusha, the great being, and there is none which is greater than He. This is the whole evolutionary journey. This journey is not only individual but also collective. Aurobindo says even societies go through tamasic evolution, rajasic evolution, and sattvic evolution. But there is no society which has yet gone beyond it. In his beautiful essay titled The Chariot of Jagannath, he speaks about it, that how in ancient India there was an attempt to have an ideal sattvic society. But even the sattvic society goes up to the foothills of the Lord. It cannot go beyond it. And how in modern times all over the world we see an impulse of rajasic society. And how in the immediate past of India itself we see a tamasic society governed by pure mechanical sleeping, and rajas has come to wake us up, and from the rajas it would go towards sattvic governance and still higher. So even social evolution is like that. And we can follow the same line of the Upanishad. When humanity is still at the level of the steeds, its gods are also physical and vital. So when humanity is in its early stages of evolution, the gods are gods which are related to the object of the senses. The elemental gods. There is a god of fire, there is a god of river, there is a god of rain, there is a god of, behind every physical object, there is a god. And these are also is a evolution of the gods. As human beings evolve, the gods are released. At the vital level, we have vital gods. The gods who fight, the gods who give, the gods of the Puranas. They literally fight in a state worse than human beings. But they are gods nevertheless because they are more powerful. Some of them are half titanic, half gods. It's difficult to say about some of these vital gods whether they are truly gods or whether they are titans, because at that level there is a mixture. And then as humanity evolves to the more mental and psychological state, the gods also become more psychological. So we have a God of mercy and a God of justice, a God of truth, a God of righteousness, a God of honesty, a God of love, a God of kindness. So gods also evolve along with the human evolution. And as we enter into the higher and higher states, these gods also change and come to their original form. So at the vital level and the mental level and at the higher mind, she who is Kali, wearing the garland of skulls, trampling over the egos, slaying evil in its own lair, the mother, ruthless and powerful and mighty and divine, becomes at the highest level the gracious, intense, powerful love of the divine. The same mother who at this level appears in this fierce form becomes at that level the mother of intense love. Without her, Ananda is less intense. Without her, knowledge only moves in wideness but not in intensities. Without her, love itself is something less than love. So this is the entire evolutionary journey, not only individual but also collective. How is one to do it? Because how it's all right, the easiest thing is to speak about sattvic governance, buddhi and all this. How is one to do it? There is no external rule, there is no external way. It is here we come back to where we started. This journey must begin from within outwards. And this, in Aurobindo's yoga, we see that there is not much of proscription, of do's and don'ts. In traditional yoga, we have yama and niyama. Do this and don't do this. The problem with these yama and niyama is, one, they become means to tell others, do this and don't do this, and not to oneself. Those who are the priest or in position of authority can easily tell others, look, this is what you are supposed to do. As for me, don't point a finger at me because I am exempt. Or they become means to haunt others, that look, so and so is not following. Or they become rigid later on the spirit has passed away and they become something rigid, making the consciousness hard and even maybe cruel. Or they become something mechanically imposed and people become hypocrites. So in front of public, they assume one face. They are very honest in public. But behind the scenes, they are terribly dishonest. They don't mind doing the most unscrupulous things as long as they don't come to public notice. We all know what public and private morality is about. So Sri Aurobindo doesn't talk of yama and niyama, but he gives a rule which is far more deeper and far more beautiful and far more enduring and lasting and true, to live from the psychic consciousness. In fact, the mother says, it is this light which shines. Even in an animal, she says, sometimes one can see this light. And this light, it's because of this that even in animal creation, there is not that vital disorder which one would expect in a purely vital creation. If you really look at the animal world, it's largely vital. But because of this presence, something stops the soul of a species from exceeding a point. Imagine if all the snakes were to really come out of their forest and invade the houses. Some very grotesque, morbid imagination when people have, they make such movies. Or all the dogs turned into jackals. What would happen? It doesn't happen. Because even in them there is something which is like a little tiny presence. How much more in a human being? In fact, she says, this is what is the hope of humanity. The hope is not that we are intelligent people. That is often to our discredit. Because every power that human beings have, they turn it to a misuse. We use intelligence to justify our vital desires and so on and so forth. Well, that's a different story. All of us do it. But it is this psychic presence which is there, which marks humanity as something different. This individual psychic presence in matter, which alone can change the entire evolutionary journey. And we can read a couple of passages about this. And for a long time, this presence is something which is hidden inside and does not come consciously to the surface. And one passes through the tamasic, rajasic and the sattvic state. The sign of turning toward the spiritual life is when this psychic presence for a moment awakes and opens its eyes. And in the secret schools, there is the system of initiation. The initiation is when a master comes and he gives a mantra and one is initiated. In Sri Aurobindo's yoga, there is no external method. So what is the method? Someone asked the mother, Mother, how do we know that you have initiated someone? What do you do? Now this must be a rule which is not only applicable when they are in their physical bodies, but even in their inner sense. So the mother gives precisely such a rule. She says, when I say I have initiated someone, it means that I have revealed myself to that person. How beautiful it is. For it is only the psychic which can recognize her as the Divine Mother. No other part. The mind will doubt and doubt and doubt. The vital will demand and demand and demand. The physical will mechanically maybe be there. But the psychic at the first contact knows she is divine. No more proof is needed, and that's the end of the old story and the beginning of the new story. This is what is called in yoga the new birth, the initiation. In ancient times it was called as new birth, Dvij, to be born again. It's not a ritual, but a real inner thing. Mother says, what is called new birth? This is volume 9, page 431. Incidentally, it is the last talk she gave in the playground. What is called new birth is the birth into the spiritual life, the spiritual consciousness. It is to carry in oneself something of the spirit, which individually, through the soul, can begin to rule the life and be the master of existence. So spiritual life is not an unruly life. It goes beyond the governance of the sattva by the governance of the soul. But in the supramental world, the spirit will be the master of the entire world. and all its manifestations, all its expressions, consciously, spontaneously, naturally. In the individual existence, that is what makes all the difference, the true difference of human beings. So long as one just speaks of the spirit and it is something one has read about, whose existence one vaguely knows about, but not a very concrete reality for the consciousness, this means that one is not born into the spirit. One may read and even write, and the book may be a bestseller. One can always write nice books on spirit and soul. It doesn't matter. The real thing is if one has experienced it. And when one is born into the spirit, it becomes something much more concrete, much more living, much more real, much more tangible than the whole material world. And the mother says that is the true spiritual consciousness. What is the difference? It has the power to communicate itself. As long as one has the mental conception, it cannot communicate that experience. It cannot transmit it. That's why she says the difference between true spirituality and imitation of it is this. Imitation is its mental forms. It cannot communicate. But true spirituality can communicate. And this is what makes the essential difference between human beings. When that becomes spontaneously real, the true, concrete existence, the atmosphere one can freely breathe, then one knows one has crossed over to the other side. But so long as it is something rather vague and hazy, you have heard about it, you know that it exists, but it has no concrete reality, well, this means that the new birth has not yet taken place. So it is that moment, it may not be all the time living, but one moment, one flash of that contact is enough to start the journey. As long as you tell yourself, yes, this I can see, this I can touch, the pain I suffer from, the hunger that torments me, the sleep that makes me feel heavy, this is real, this is concrete. In bracket, mother laughs. Naturally, that means that you have not yet crossed over to the other side. You are not born into the spirit. In fact, then she laments, in fact, the vast majority of men are like prisoners. It applies to all of us. We are like prisoners with all the doors and windows closed. This is worse. We are not only prisoners, we have the doors and windows closed. And the roof also. Roof is tightly closed, jam closed. Roof is the intellect, hard lid of the intellect. That is what the Sri Aurobindo has used an expression in Savitri. And this lid, when they try to blow off, sometimes they have to blow it off with a dynamite. Something shocking happens and the lid breaks. We lament, my God, you have taken the roof over my head. This was the only door of safety. Now I have lost myself. We are so glued to it. The mother, in one of her experiences, describes that in Paris, during one of her talks, one boy who was present suddenly had the experience of the infinite in the finite. The mother said, look, we speak of mother, you see, this is in Paris, before coming to Pondicherry. She could transmit the experience of infinite in the finite. Of course, she is humble enough not to say that. But she says, while this meeting was going on, a boy had the experience. The mother has known that she is experiencing it. She doesn't say how she knows it. Only one who has experienced it can know it. So she says that he had the true experience of the infinite and in the finite. But he got frightened. He felt that he is losing his head and he ran away from there. So this is what she is saying, that we like to close the windows. Every time we like to put one more extra door that God should not actually enter in. It's all right that I am here and take the name of God. But they have with them the key that opens the doors and windows. And they do not use it. This is the tragedy of us humans. We have the doors and windows closed, all right. We have the key. But instead of using the key to open, we use it to strengthen one more lock. This is the psychic key. Certainly, there is a time when they don't know they have the key. but long after they have come to know it. All of us qualify in that category. Long after they have come to know it. Long after they've been told about it. They hesitate to use it and doubt whether it has the power to open the doors and windows, or even that it is a good thing to open them. This is our mind. Is it really nice? Mother has spoken about psychic and all that, but reason is the real thing. See how much science has progressed through reason. They are doubting it. And even when they feel that after all it might be good, even after one feels okay, it may be a good thing to do, there remains some fear. What will happen when these doors and windows are opened? And they are afraid. They are afraid of being lost in that light and freedom. This is the true freedom. They want to remain what they call themselves. This is the struggle between the ego and that which is beyond it. They like their falsehood and their bondage. Man is in love with his ignorance. This is what Aurobindo says in Savitri. Something in them likes it and goes on clinging to it. They still have the impression that without their limits, they would no longer exist. So we have all these mental ideas and conceptions that these things are very nice, they are written in books. Don't put it into practice. They are very nice where they are. That is why the journey is so long. That is why it is difficult. For if one truly consented to cease to exist, everything would become so easy. If one is willing to let the ego be dropped. That's what she's mentioning here as cease to exist. How does it matter? Everything would become so easy, so swift, so luminous, so joyful. But perhaps not in the way men understand joy and ease. She is qualifying it so that we don't think, oh, joyful and easy. So that means I will get a lot of money and life will become very easy. It's not life, but the journey becomes very easy and joyous. In truth, there are very few people who do not enjoy fighting. In one of her messages, she says, people like to quarrel. They are not comfortable without it. There are very few who could accept the absence of night. Few can conceive of light except as the opposite of darkness. Without shadows, there would be no picture. Without struggle, there would be no victory. Without suffering, there would be no joy. In fact, we have more faith in suffering than faith in grace. That is what they think. And so long as one thinks in this way, one is not yet born into the spirit. To the next class will be the last in this series. If we have a class depending on the program, after that we'll have a break for some time, and then when it restarts, the notice will be put up once again.